Long before airplanes or the internet, ancient sailors connected the world. This is the story of how sea voyages thousands of years ago built our global culture, exchanging everything from writing systems to food crops. By the end, you will see the map of human history completely redrawn, revealing a past woven together by ocean currents. How did a single alphabet from a small group of traders become the foundation for languages across the globe? Why do we find identical sweet potatoes in both South America and Polynesia, separated by an entire ocean? The answers lie in forgotten journeys across terrifying and open water. What does it mean to discover that our world was always connected? The world was a collection of separate rooms, each civilization living within its own four walls. In one room, the Maya charted the stars with breathtaking precision, unaware that in another room, far across the ocean, Polynesian navigators were using those same stars to sail across thousands of miles of open water. This was the reality for most of human history. Societies grew in deep isolation, cultivating languages, gods, and technologies that were utterly unique to their corner of the globe. A brilliant idea born in the Indus Valley might never reach the Mediterranean. A new crop domesticated in the highlands of Peru was completely unknown in ancient China. This isolation was the rule, not the exception, because the oceans that cover our planet were the ultimate locked doors. They were not blue highways on a map, but terrifying expanses of unknown depth, inhabited by leviathans and governed by storms. To look out from the shore was to look into a void. This profound separation is what makes the story of ancient sea travel so revolutionary. It was not an incremental change, but a key that suddenly unlocked all those separate rooms, allowing for a conversation that would reshape humanity. The moment that key was forged, the moment someone built a vessel capable of defying the ocean, was the moment our world truly began to connect. The story of that key begins not with grand empires, but with a handful of people on a shoreline over 130,000 years ago. On the island of Crete, far from any mainland, archaeologists have unearthed stone tools so ancient they defy our previous understanding of human capability. These artifacts are a silent, undeniable testament to a journey across open water. Someone, incredibly long ago, looked at the horizon and decided to cross it. They likely used the simplest of vessels, perhaps rafts lashed together from logs or canoes hollowed from a single tree. Their motivations were elemental, driven by the need for new hunting grounds, the search for stone for their tools, or simply an irrepressible curiosity about what lay beyond the blue expanse. This was not a one-off event. Far to the east, the ancient continent known as Sahul, which joined Australia and New Guinea, was reached by humans around 60,000 years ago. Reaching it required crossing a series of sea channels, some over 60 miles wide. This was not a casual paddle along the coast. It was a deliberate voyage into the unknown, a feat of planning and observation that proves our ancestors were reading the ocean's signs long before they had written words. They learned to read the subtle patterns of waves that hinted at distant land, to follow the flight paths of birds at dusk, and to navigate by the fixed points of stars in the night sky. Every crossing was a gamble with the highest stakes, a testament to a courage that would eventually build our world. This foundational era of perilous journeys, spanning tens of thousands of years, slowly cultivated the maritime knowledge that would one day empower the first great seafaring cultures to truly connect the globe. This deep-seated maritime courage, cultivated over millennia, would eventually find its ultimate expression in a single civilization. By 1000 BC, the shores of the eastern Mediterranean hummed with an energy unlike anything the world had seen. The Phoenicians were not conquerors who marched by land, but masters of the sea. From their bustling city ports like Tyre and Sidon, they launched sleek, revolutionary ships called biremes, powered by both oars and sails, capable of slicing through waves that would swamp lesser vessels. Their cargo holds were filled with treasures that made them legends, from the vibrant purple dye extracted from sea snails, a color so rare it became synonymous with royalty, to the strong, fragrant cedar wood from the mountains of Lebanon. These were not just merchants, they were explorers driven by an insatiable commercial curiosity. Their voyages took them to the very edges of the known world, from the tin mines of ancient Britain to the golden coasts of West Africa. But their true genius was not in what they carried, but in what they built. They established a network of trading posts, outposts that grew into powerful cities in their own right, like Carthage in North Africa and Cadiz in Spain. These were not colonies of conquest, but neutral grounds, cultural melting pots where Egyptians, Greeks, Iberians, and countless others could meet and mingle. In these ports, goods were exchanged, but so were ideas, technologies, and artistic styles. An Egyptian artistic motif might be copied by a Greek artisan, while a new metalworking technique from the East could spread westward. The most profound exchange, however, was a tool of pure practicality. The Phoenicians, needing a simple way to keep track of complex transactions, developed the first widely used alphabet. It was a revolutionary system that replaced the thousands of cumbersome symbols used by empires like Egypt with a compact set of just over 20 characters, each representing a sound. This was not created for poets or priests, but for merchants and accountants. Yet this tool of commerce became a catalyst for an intellectual revolution. It was so efficient and easy to learn that it was rapidly adopted and adapted by their trading partners, most notably the Greeks. This single innovation, born from the need to record a trade of purple cloth or cedar logs, would become the very foundation of Western literacy. The Phoenicians wove a web across the Mediterranean, connecting disparate cultures and creating a shared foundation of knowledge. They set the stage, proving that the sea could be a bridge for civilization itself, a lesson that would soon be taken up by another group of incredible voyagers far to the east. The Phoenician web of trade was confined to a single, albeit vast, sea. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, a different kind of maritime epic was unfolding across an ocean so immense it could swallow the entire landmass of the earth. This was the domain of the Polynesian Wayfinders. Their vessel was the double-hulled canoe, or wa, a masterpiece of maritime engineering that rode the ocean swells with a stable grace. On such a craft, a navigator stood not with a compass or a chart, but with a mind honed into a living instrument. They learned to read the subtle patterns of ocean swells, feeling the way the canoe pitched and rolled to detect the reflected waves that hinted at an unseen island beyond the horizon. They memorized the precise rising and setting points of hundreds of stars, creating a celestial compass that guided them through the night. A change in the type of seabird, or the specific direction of its flight at dusk, could signal the proximity of land dozens of miles away. This was not random drift. It was a highly skilled, intentional science of exploration, passed down through generations in charts and intricate star compasses carved into wood. This knowledge powered one of the most breathtaking migrations in human history. Starting from islands in Southeast Asia, these voyagers slowly, methodically settled the vast Pacific. They discovered and populated specks of land separated by thousands of miles of open ocean, from the towering volcanoes of Hawaii to the remote shores of Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island. and finally to the vast islands of Aotearoa, New Zealand. They did not travel light. Their great canoes were floating arks carrying everything needed to start a new life. This included a transported ecosystem, taro and sweet potato plants, chickens, dogs, and unfortunately, the Polynesian rat. Wherever they landed, they brought a shared culture, a common language family known as Austronesian, and a way of life adapted to the sea. The presence of the sweet potato, a plant native to South America, across Polynesia poses one of history's most tantalizing questions. Did Polynesian sailors reach the Americas, or did Amerindian voyagers venture into the Pacific? This single crop is a silent witness to a connection we are only beginning to understand, a testament to voyages so audacious they defy belief. This mastery of the Pacific, built on a profound and intimate connection to the natural world, stands as a parallel achievement to the trade networks of the Mediterranean. Yet, as one ocean was being consciously united by exploration, another was about to be transformed by the engine of commerce. While Polynesian navigators read the stars to settle a vast ocean, another maritime network was thriving, one built not on exploration but on commerce. In the ancient Indian Ocean, the rhythm of trade was set by a force of nature, the monsoon winds. For half the year, these winds blew steadily from the southwest, and for the other half, they reversed, blowing just as reliably from the northeast. This predictable cycle created a maritime superhighway, allowing ships to sail out with one monsoon and return with the next. The vessels that plied this route were the Dhows, elegant sailing ships with lateen sails, triangular in shape, that could harness the wind with incredible efficiency. Their cargo holds were filled with the very sense of wealth and desire. From the jungles of southern India came black pepper, a spice so valuable it was often worth its weight in gold. From the islands of Southeast Asia came cinnamon and cloves, and from the depths of the ocean, pearls. This was an economic circuit of staggering scale, linking the Roman Empire's hunger for luxuries with the production centers of India and the Spice Islands far to the east. But this network was far more than an exchange of goods. It was the world's first truly multicultural arena. In bustling ports like Muziris on India's Malabar coast or Muscat on the Arabian Peninsula, you would hear a cacophony of languages. Greek merchants haggled with Tamil chiefs, Arab sailors shared navigational charts with Chinese captains, and all of them relied on a shared understanding of the winds and the stars. These ports were neutral grounds where the primary loyalty was not to a king or an empire, but to profit and knowledge, and it was knowledge that became the most enduring cargo. Along with sacks of pepper and bundles of silk, ships carried ideas that would reshape continents. Buddhism and Hinduism, for instance, did not march into Southeast Asia with armies. They sailed there on merchant vessels. They took root in the kingdoms of Java and Sumatra, their stories and philosophies woven into local cultures, creating the magnificent temple complexes like Borobudur. In the other direction, astronomical and mathematical knowledge from India profoundly influenced the Arab world. Perhaps the most significant export was not a thing at all, but a concept, the concept of zero. This seemingly simple idea, a placeholder that represents nothing, was a revolutionary leap in human thought. It allowed for the development of the place value system, the very foundation of modern mathematics. The journey of zero, from the scholars of India to the mathematicians of the Middle East and eventually to Europe, was almost certainly made on the decks of these trading dhows. This maritime web created a cosmopolitan world where ideas flowed as freely as goods, fostering a level of global interconnection that would not be seen again for centuries. The stability of this entire network, however, relied on more than just favorable winds. It demanded a shared understanding of the sea itself. a knowledge captured in remarkable feats of maritime engineering and navigation. The creak of a longship's oars cut through the frigid North Atlantic air, a rhythmic sound marking humanity's determined push into one of its final frontiers. While merchants sailed the monsoon winds and Polynesians charted the stars, Norse explorers were driven west by a potent mix of necessity and nerve. In Scandinavia, fertile land was scarce, inherited by the eldest sons, leaving younger siblings with a stark choice: to fight for a piece of home or to sail into the unknown. Their vessels, the iconic longships, were marvels of flexibility and shallow draft, allowing them to ride the open ocean swell one day and navigate far up inland rivers the next. They were not just ships, they were the key to a new life. First, they settled Iceland, then pushed further to the green, volcanic shores of Greenland. But the saga did not end there. Around the year 1000, a ship captained by Leif Erikson was blown off course, sighting a coast lush with forests and wild grapevines, a land they called Vinland. This was North America, reached by Europeans nearly 500 years before Columbus. The Norse sagas, epic poems passed down orally before being written on calfskin, recount brief but monumental encounters with the indigenous peoples they called Skraelings. These meetings were often tense, a clash of worlds marked by curiosity, trade, and sometimes conflict. They were fleeting, and the Norse settlements in North America did not last, but their existence rewrites a chapter of history, proving the Atlantic was not an impassable barrier. While some Norse were pushing west, others, known as the Rus, were forging an eastern web of connection. They mastered the river systems of Eastern Europe, portaging their ships between waterways to create a trade route from the Baltic Sea all the way to the Black Sea. Their destination was Constantinople, the dazzling capital of the Byzantine Empire, a city of unimaginable wealth. Down these rivers they brought furs from the north, amber washed up on Baltic shores, and honey. In return, they carried back silk, wine, and most importantly, silver coins from the Arab world, vast quantities of which have been found in Viking hordes across Scandinavia. This was more than a trade in goods. It was an exchange of DNA, as Norse traders settled and intermarried along these routes, and of ideas, as they encountered the advanced engineering and Christianity of Byzantium. The Norse expansion, both west and east, demonstrates a crucial truth. Exploration was not a linear story with a single origin point. It was a global phenomenon happening concurrently across the planet. The Viking voyages were one powerful thread in a much larger tapestry, a tapestry that was about to be torn apart by a single, devastating force, a force that would sever these ancient connections and plunge the world back into a long era of silence. Yet the idea of a completely isolated new world is challenged by mysteries carved in stone. In the humid jungles of Veracruz, Mexico, stand the colossal heads of the Olmec civilization, the first major culture in Mesoamerica. These massive basalt sculptures, some weighing over 20 tons, depict faces with broad, flat noses and full lips, features that to some observers bear a striking resemblance to artistic traditions in West Africa. This visual similarity has ignited a passionate and enduring debate. Could ancient sailors from Africa have successfully crossed the Atlantic Ocean thousands of years before Columbus? Proponents of this transoceanic-contact theory point to more than just sculptures. They highlight the independent emergence of pyramid building in both Egypt and the Americas, the use of similar symbols like the serpent in religious contexts, and even the presence of plants like the bottle gourd, which may have floated across the ocean or been carried by human hands. The Gulf Stream current, a powerful river within the sea, flows steadily from the coast of West Africa toward the Americas. A vessel caught in this current could, theoretically, make the crossing. Mainstream archaeologists, however, remain deeply skeptical. They argue that similarity is not proof of contact, and that these cultural traits, from pyramids to complex societies, developed independently in response to similar human needs. They point to a profound lack of conclusive evidence, like shipwrecks, distinctive African artifacts buried in undisturbed Olmec layers, or any genetic marker in ancient American DNA that would confirm such a voyage. This academic divide forces a fundamental question. Are we looking at evidence of a lost chapter of human exploration, or are we seeing a common artistic vocabulary that arises when humans work with stone on a monumental scale? Whether these theories are ultimately proven true or not, their power lies in what they reveal about our own desire to find connection. They challenge a history that feels too neat, too separated into boxes. They push us to ask not just if such a journey was possible, but to examine the very tools that would have been required. What kind of vessel could possibly survive a months-long drift across the open Atlantic? The answer may lie not in a single ship, but in a material, one so simple and versatile it revolutionized sea travel across the globe. The debate over transoceanic contact often hinges on a single, crucial question: what kind of boat could possibly survive such a journey? The answer lies in a quiet revolution of maritime engineering that unfolded not on the open ocean, but in the sheltered waters and river deltas of Southeast Asia over 3,000 years ago. Here, boatbuilders perfected a technique known as the lashed lug construction. Instead of using nails or pegs, they carved the planks of the hull so that protruding lugs or shoulders remained on the inside. They then drilled holes through these lugs and lashed the planks together with cords made from resilient plant fibers like coir. This created a vessel that was not rigid but flexible. When hitting a large wave, the entire hull could twist and give slightly, absorbing the stress rather than splintering apart. This was a boat designed to breathe with the ocean, a technology that would become the foundation for the vast Austronesian expansion across the Pacific. It was the hardware that made the software of celestial navigation possible. On the other side of the world, a different innovation was mastering the wind itself. The lateen sail, a triangular rig that first appeared in the Arab world and the Indian Ocean, was a masterpiece of aerodynamic efficiency. Unlike a simple square sail that mostly pushes a ship downwind, the lateen sail could be angled to capture the wind from the side, even from slightly ahead. This allowed ships to sail in a zigzag pattern against the prevailing wind, effectively conquering a direction that was previously a dead end. This transformed the sea from a one-way street into a multi-lane highway. Meanwhile, in China, shipwrights were making breakthroughs that would define vessel stability and control for centuries. The invention of the sternpost rudder, a single, large steering oar mounted centrally on the ship's stern, gave captains unprecedented command over their direction, especially in heavy weather. Even more critical was the development of the keel, a strong backbone running the length of the ship's bottom. The keel did more than provide strength, it acted like a fin, preventing the ship from sliding sideways in the water and dramatically increasing its stability. Combine this with multiple masts carrying several sails, and you had ships that were true heavy freighters of the ancient world, capable of carrying enormous cargoes across vast distances. The most beautiful aspect of this technological story is that it was never confined to one culture. Innovation spread because the sea itself was a meeting place. An Arab dhow captain in a Chinese port might see the efficiency of a sternpost rudder and bring the idea back to the shipwrights in Oman. A European sailor trading in the Indian Ocean would have seen the lateen sail and recognized its superior ability to sail close to the wind, eventually adopting it for Mediterranean vessels. This cross-pollination was accelerated by one of the most transformative inventions in human history, the magnetic compass. First developed in China during the Han Dynasty as a tool for divination, it was sailors who recognized its true potential. By the 11th century, Chinese navigators were using magnetized needles floating in bowls of water to maintain their course when the sky was overcast and the stars were invisible. This technology did not remain a secret for long. Through the interconnected trade routes of the Indian Ocean and the Silk Road, the knowledge of the compass spread westward, reaching the Mediterranean within 100 years. Suddenly, a captain was no longer completely blind on a cloudy day. Each of these leaps, the flexible hull, the efficient sail, the deep keel, and the magnetic guide, systematically reduced the terrifying randomness of the sea. They turned a voyage from a desperate gamble into a calculated risk. This technological evolution provided the physical tools, the hardware for global connection. But the voyage was not over yet, for the most sophisticated ship is useless without the knowledge to guide it, the intricate science of finding your way when there is nothing but water in every direction. The ocean's surface was a treacherous and ever-changing map, but the night sky offered a permanent one. For ancient mariners, the heavens were not a distant mystery, they were a practical, living guidebook. Every culture that ventured beyond sight of land developed its own intricate relationship with the stars, turning random points of light into a structured system for survival. In the northern hemisphere, the North Star, Polaris, became the unwavering anchor. Because it sits almost directly above the Earth's North Pole, it remains fixed in the sky while all other stars appear to rotate around it. A sailor simply needed to know the angle between Polaris and the horizon to understand their latitude, their north-south position on the globe. The higher the star appeared, the farther north they were. But this was just the beginning. Navigators memorized the cyclical paths of the sun and moon, understanding how their positions shifted with the seasons. They identified what we might call star compasses, specific bright stars that always rose and set at the same point on the horizon. By knowing which star marked the direction to a desired island as it rose, and which marked it as it set, a navigator could hold a true course through the night. The Polynesian Wayfinders elevated this to an art form. They conceptualized a star path, imagining their destination island as a stationary point beneath the moving dome of the sky. They would memorize the precise sequence of stars that would pass directly over that island. To sail there, they did not steer toward a single star, but rather kept their canoe positioned so that the correct star was always at its zenith, directly overhead as it crossed the sky. This required an encyclopedic knowledge of the celestial sphere, a mental map passed down through chants and apprenticeships. Meanwhile, in the vastness of the Indian Ocean, Arab and Indian sailors developed a simple yet brilliant tool to codify this knowledge, the camel. It was nothing more than a small rectangular piece of wood, attached to a string with several knots tied in it. The sailor would hold one end of the string to their eye and slide the wooden card up or down until its edges lined up with the horizon and a specific star like Polaris. The knot that touched their nose indicated their latitude. This humble device transformed an abstract concept into a tangible measurement, allowing for remarkably accurate navigation along established trade routes. This shared celestial knowledge created a universal language that transcended culture. A Viking helmsman staring at the same North Star as an Arab nakhoda, or captain, was participating in the same fundamental human endeavor. They were using a common logic written in light, a silent agreement across continents that the sky was the one map everyone could read. But the heavens could be obscured by cloud or storm, and the sea itself held its own, more immediate secrets for those who knew how to listen. The ocean itself provided the highways. Ancient mariners did not simply fight the sea, they learned to read its deepest rhythms to harness the planet's own energy. They became master ecologists, understanding that the wind and water moved in vast, predictable patterns. For a Norse trader aiming for Iceland, catching the North Atlantic drift was like catching a river within the sea. This powerful current, an extension of the Gulf Stream, carried warm water northeast from the Americas, offering a relatively swift passage that made settlement of the remote North Atlantic islands possible. To miss this current meant weeks of grueling, fruitless rowing against an invisible force, risking starvation and despair. Half a world away, the entire economy of the Indian Ocean was built around a seasonal clock, the monsoon winds. For 6 months, the wind blew steadily from the southwest, carrying ships laden with goods from Africa and Arabia toward India. Then, as if on cue, the winds reversed, blowing from the northeast for the other half of the year, allowing those same ships to make the return journey. This predictability transformed trade from a dangerous gamble into a scheduled enterprise. In the Pacific, Polynesian wayfinders held the great ocean gyres, massive circular currents, in their minds as part of their navigational charts. They knew that a specific current could carry them reliably toward a chain of islands, while another might sweep them into an empty void. This knowledge was not found in any book. It was earned through observation and tragedy, passed down as a sacred trust from parent to child, from master to apprentice. A guild of pilots in an Indian Ocean port might guard their handwritten rudders, their books of sailing directions, as fiercely as a king guards his treasury. This intimate, hard-won relationship with the environment was the invisible infrastructure that made long-distance voyages feasible. It was the reason a culture could transplant itself across an ocean. And when those cultures met, the most profound exchange often was not gold or spices, but the very words they spoke. The silent, rhythmic pulse of ocean currents carried more than just ships and spices. It carried the very words we speak. Languages did not simply evolve in isolation, they sailed. The most dramatic example of this is the Austronesian language family, a linguistic empire built by canoe. It began with a single ancestral tongue spoken in what is now Taiwan over 5,000 years ago. As these master mariners explored and settled the Pacific, their language traveled with them, branching and evolving on each new island chain. Today, the result is staggering. A person speaking Malagasy in Madagascar and a person speaking Maori in New Zealand are using languages that diverged from a common ancestral root. The distance between them is over 10,000 kilometers of open ocean, yet their speech retains a hidden connection forged by those ancient voyages. This is not a story of similar words by chance, but of a shared grammatical backbone and core vocabulary that proves a profound historical link. The ocean was not a barrier, it was a conduit for an entire family of human expression. On the other side of the world, a different kind of linguistic revolution was unfolding in the crowded ports of the Mediterranean. The Phoenician alphabet, a set of 22 efficient characters designed for tallying goods, proved to be an idea too powerful to contain. Its genius was its simplicity, representing sounds instead of complex ideas or syllables. When the Greeks encountered this system through trade, they recognized its potential and adapted it for their own language, adding vowels to create a truly versatile script. This Greek alphabet would then travel, influencing the Etruscans and eventually the Romans, whose Latin script became the foundation for most Western European languages, including the one you are hearing now. The journey from a Phoenician merchant's ledger to the words on your screen was made possible by the constant movement of ships across a connected sea. But what happened when people who shared no common language were forced to communicate? In the bustling, multicultural ports from the Swahili coast to the South China Sea, a practical solution emerged: the pidgin. These were not full languages but simplified, hybrid systems of communication, blending basic vocabulary from two or more tongues with a stripped-down grammar. They served a single purpose: to enable trade, to negotiate prices, and to coordinate the loading of ships. However, when a generation of children grew up hearing a pidgin as their primary linguistic environment, something remarkable occurred. They instinctively enriched it, giving it a complex and consistent grammar, transforming it into a full-fledged Creole language. These new languages, born from necessity in the world's harbor towns, are living monuments to ancient cultural encounters. They are the linguistic DNA of a globalized past, proving that when humans meet, even without a shared past, they will inevitably create a shared future through the power of speech. And woven into every word they exchanged were the stories that gave their lives meaning. A story of a great flood echoes across the world, a shared memory held by cultures separated by oceans and continents. In ancient Mesopotamia, the hero of the Epic of Gilgamesh builds a boat to survive the gods' deluge. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah gathers animals into an ark. On the other side of the world, the Maya spoke of a flood that destroyed a race of wooden people, while indigenous tribes along the Pacific coast of North America have their own powerful deluge narratives. This global pattern presents a haunting question. Did this story arise independently in each culture as a way to explain local cataclysms, or was it a single, ancient tale that traveled, carried on the currents by the world's first sailors? The possibility that these myths are a literary fossil, a preserved account of a voyage from one land to another, is tantalizing. A storyteller arriving on a new shore might share the legend of their homeland's great flood, and over generations, that story would be woven into the local beliefs, changing details but keeping its core intact. This was not an isolated exchange. The most documented example of a world-view sailing across the sea is the journey of Buddhism. It began in northeastern India, but its transformation into a global faith was a maritime achievement. Buddhist monks, often traveling as passengers on the large merchant ships that plied the Indian Ocean trade routes, carried palm leaf manuscripts and small statues rather than trade goods. They disembarked in the bustling ports of Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and the Malay Peninsula, establishing monasteries that became centers of learning and translation. From there, the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, traveled on to the great kingdoms of Southeast Asia. The proof is etched in stone and brick. The magnificent temple of Borobudur in Java is not merely an Indonesian structure. It is a massive, three-dimensional map of the Buddhist cosmos, its intricate relief panels depicting the life of the Buddha and the principles of karma in a style directly influenced by Indian art and thought. Similarly, the grand temple complexes of Angkor in Cambodia, while dedicated to Hindu gods like Vishnu and Shiva, display a profound fusion of Indian architectural principles with local genius and artistic sensibility. These were not slavish copies but creative adaptations, a conversation in architecture where local beliefs and aesthetics blended with the imported ideas to create something entirely new and powerful. The ships did not just carry sacred texts and architectural blueprints, they carried revolutionary ideas about time, mathematics, and medicine. The concept of zero, so vital to modern science, likely made its way from India to the Arab world and eventually to Europe along these same sea lanes. A monk on a trading dhow was a vessel for philosophy, and a merchant's ledger could contain the seeds of a mathematical revolution. The ocean was a conduit for the very frameworks through which people understood reality itself. A single sweet potato root pulled from the soil of a Polynesian island carries within it the ghost of an impossible voyage. This humble tuber, native to the Andes Mountains of South America, should not exist in the Pacific Islands thousands of miles away, yet there it was, thriving in Polynesian gardens when European explorers first arrived. The only plausible explanation is that someone, at some point, successfully crossed the vast emptiness of the Pacific, carrying the vital food source with them. This was not an isolated event. The global pantry we take for granted is a direct result of these ancient sea lanes. Bananas, first domesticated in the jungles of Southeast Asia, made their way across the Indian Ocean to Africa, not overland, but on the boats of Austronesian sailors who settled Madagascar. The chicken, domesticated from the red jungle fowl of the same region, became a global food source, its bones appearing in archaeological sites from Roman Europe to pre-Inca South America, all because maritime networks turned it into a living, clucking cargo. These transfers were sometimes accidental, like the hardy rats that stowed away on canoes, but more often they were deeply intentional acts of survival. Migrants setting sail for a new island did not travel light. They were floating arcs of biodiversity, carrying the cuttings, seeds, and animals that represented their entire way of life. Taro, yams, breadfruit, and coconut palms were as essential to their voyage as freshwater. To plant these familiar crops in a new land was to recreate a piece of home, to ensure their children would eat the same foods their ancestors had. This biological diffusion was arguably more transformative than the exchange of spices or silk. A new staple crop could support a population boom, allowing societies to flourish where they once struggled. The arrival of the chicken provided a reliable source of protein that was easier to manage than wild game. These were not just changes to a menu, they were fundamental rewritings of a society's relationship with the land, altering agricultural calendars, labor patterns, and even social structures. This was a biological globalization that preceded political globalization by centuries. As these plants and animals traveled, so did the artistic ideas that gave them meaning. The motifs painted on a pot or carved into a temple wall began to tell a new, blended story, a visual record of connection written not in words but in form and symbol. A cargo ship unloading amphorae of wine in an Indian port carried more than just a beverage, it carried an entire aesthetic vision. The most striking fusion of artistic worlds occurred in the ancient region of Gandhara. After the conquests of Alexander the Great, Greek culture was planted deep in Central Asia. Centuries later, when Buddhism flourished along the trade routes, local sculptors began creating images of the Buddha. But they faced a challenge. Indian tradition had long avoided depicting the Buddha in human form, using symbols like a footprint or an empty throne instead. Inspired by the Hellenistic statues all around them, the Gandharan artists broke with tradition. They began to sculpt the Buddha in human form, but they did not simply copy a Greek god. They blended the idealized, realistic musculature of Apollo with the serene, spiritual essence of the Buddha. The result was a revolutionary new icon, a figure draped in robes that fell in soft, classical folds, with a face bearing a calm, introspective expression that was entirely Eastern. This Gandharan Buddha became the template that would eventually spread along the Silk Road and into China and Japan, forever changing Buddhist art. It was a conversation in stone, mediated by the merchants who traveled between worlds. This cross-pollination of style was not confined to grand sculptures. It is visible in the very clay of a humble ceramic bowl. For centuries, a distinct type of pottery, known as the Maritime Silk Road ceramic style, has been found in shipwrecks and ports from Egypt to Japan. These were not always luxury items, but often practical wares traded as ballast or containers, yet their decorations tell a story of globalized taste. A potter in southern China might paint a design inspired by Islamic metalwork he had seen in a foreign merchant's possession. That plate would then be shipped to Persia, where a local artisan might imitate its pattern, adding their own floral motifs. The aesthetic preferences of one culture slowly seeped into the production of another, creating a hybrid visual language that was understood in ports across the Indian Ocean. This was a slow, unconscious process of influence where beauty itself became a trade good. Even the bones of buildings were shaped by these maritime connections. Across Southeast Asia, the grand temple complexes of places like Angkor Wat were built with a remarkable durability thanks to a specific architectural technique, the use of lime mortar. While local builders had their own methods, the knowledge of how to create a high-quality, water-resistant mortar that could withstand the region's torrential rains likely arrived on ships from the Indian subcontinent. This was not a simple transfer of a recipe, it was the movement of an idea, a solution to a shared problem of monumentality. The local architects then used this technique to construct temples in a distinctly Khmer style, with soaring towers shaped like lotus buds. They adapted the imported knowledge to celebrate their own gods and their own vision of the cosmos. These artistic and architectural fusions did not happen in a vacuum. They flourished in the world's first cosmopolitan hubs, the port cities. In places like Quanju in China or Malacca in Malaysia, you would find neighborhoods for Arab traders, Gujarati merchants, and Chinese officials all nestled together. In these vibrant, crowded spaces, a weaver from Gujarat might see a Chinese silk pattern and incorporate it into her next sari. A metal worker from Damascus could observe a new casting technique from a Southeast Asian craftsman. The port was a permanent cultural fair, a living laboratory where styles were constantly being mixed, matched, and reinvented. This was never a story of one culture dominating another, but of creative dialogue. The foreign influence was not a stamp to be copied, but a new color on the palette, allowing local artists to paint a more complex and interconnected picture of their world. These cities were living organisms, their hearts beating to the rhythm of the tides. In the harbor of Alexandria, beneath the shadow of the great lighthouse, the languages of a dozen empires mingled in the air. A Roman merchant, more accustomed to the forums of his home city, could find himself debating the movements of planets with an astronomer from the University of Nalanda in India. The argument would be conducted in a simplified Greek, the common tongue of Mediterranean trade, yet the concepts being exchanged were transforming both of their worlds. This was the daily reality of the cosmopolitan port, a place where your neighbor's god was as familiar as the smell of spices from his warehouse. For commerce to flow smoothly, a degree of religious tolerance was not just a virtue, it was an economic imperative. A Hindu trader would not do business in a port where his temple was desecrated, just as a Muslim ship captain would avoid a city that persecuted his faith. This practical need for coexistence fostered an environment of remarkable intellectual freedom. The city itself was a map of this fusion. You would find a dedicated Arab quarter with its mosque, a Jewish synagogue nestled beside a Zoroastrian fire temple, and a bustling Chinatown where the clatter of mahjong tiles echoed through the streets. The marketplace was the great equalizer, a cacophony of haggling where the value of a bolt of silk was understood in any language. Out of this constant, intimate contact, new identities were forged. Along the East African coast, the Swahili culture emerged from centuries of interaction between Bantu-speaking African communities and Arab and Persian traders. The Swahili language itself is a perfect artifact of this exchange. Its grammatical structure rooted in Bantu languages, but with a huge portion of its vocabulary borrowed from Arabic, creating a unique linguistic bridge between continents. Even the food on a merchant's plate told a story of connection. The fiery chilies that would one day define many Asian cuisines were not yet present. but the exchange of cooking techniques and staple ingredients was constant. A Persian recipe for stew might be adapted using local Southeast Asian coconut milk, creating a new dish that belonged to the port alone. These cities were not just points of transfer, they were crucibles of creation. The wealth they generated was astronomical, financing the construction of grand mosques, libraries, and palaces that proclaimed the power of their rulers. This very prosperity, however, made them glittering targets. The same sea routes that brought silks and scholars could also carry armies and envy, setting the stage for a confrontation that would reshape the world's balance of power. The wealth of a port city was a siren call that could not be ignored. Maritime trade created cosmopolitan hubs, but it also forged maritime empires, where control of the water was not just about profit, but about power. A state that commanded the sea lanes could dictate terms, tax commerce, and project its culture far beyond its own shores. The Athenian Empire in the 5th century BC was a classic example of this thalassocracy, or sea power. Its formidable fleet of triremes ensured that the grain routes from the Black Sea to Athens remained open, funding a golden age of philosophy and art. But this cultural flowering was underwritten by a network of subordinate allies who were compelled to pay tribute and accept Athenian political dominance. The sea was their highway of influence, allowing a single city-state to shape the entire Aegean world. A similar story unfolded 1,000 years later and half a world away with the Srivijaya Empire based on the island of Sumatra. From the 7th to the 13th centuries, Srivijaya's power did not come from vast territorial holdings, but from its strategic chokehold on the Strait of Malacca, the narrow passage through which all trade between China and India had to flow. By controlling this maritime bottleneck, Srivijaya grew immensely wealthy, and with that wealth came cultural prestige. It became a major center for Buddhist learning, attracting scholars from across Asia and disseminating its interpretation of the faith throughout the Malay archipelago. This was cultural influence achieved not by marching armies but by anchoring ships. The dynamic shifted dramatically with the arrival of European powers in the Indian Ocean. The Portuguese, followed by the Dutch and the English, did not seek to integrate themselves into the existing multicultural trade network. They sought to dominate and replace it. Their heavily armed carracks and galleons were not just trading vessels, they were floating fortresses designed to enforce monopolies by force. Where Arab and Indian merchants had cooperated, the Europeans coerced. They seized key ports like Goa in India and Malacca in Malaysia, not as neutral trading posts, but as fortified bases from which they could control all maritime traffic. This was a much more aggressive form of cultural projection. The Portuguese language was imposed as the lingua franca of administration and trade in their holdings. Missionaries followed the traders, actively seeking to convert local populations and suppress indigenous religious practices. This process was far from peaceful, involving the destruction of temples and the forceful imposition of foreign laws. Yet, even under this pressure, cultural exchange was not a one-way street. The conquered and influenced peoples adapted and resisted in creative ways. In places like Goa, a unique Indo-Portuguese culture emerged, blending European architectural styles with local artistic sensibilities. A Christian church might be decorated with motifs drawn from Hindu temple art. Local cuisine absorbed new ingredients from the Americas, like potatoes and chilies, introduced by the Portuguese, creating entirely new dishes that are now considered traditional. The very nature of empire was redefined by the sea. Unlike a land-based empire that expanded its borders contiguously, a maritime empire was a constellation of strategic points. It was a network of ports, islands, and coastal enclaves, held together by the ships that moved between them. This created a new kind of political entity, one that was decentralized yet connected, its power flowing along the sea lanes rather than radiating from a central capital. This imperial rivalry itself became a powerful engine for further exploration. Nations locked in competition for the spice trade were driven to find new routes, to map unknown coasts, and to form alliances with distant peoples, each voyage adding another thread to the ever-tightening web of global connection. The fame of the Silk Road conjures images of camel caravans snaking through desert dunes, but the real heavyweight of ancient trade moved silently over the waves. A single ship could carry the cargo of 1,000 camels, and its journey was not blocked by mountain passes or the shifting borders of warring empires. While the land routes were legendary for transporting luxury items like silk and jade, goods that were lightweight and incredibly valuable, the maritime networks dealt in a different kind of wealth. They were the bulk carriers of the ancient world. A ship's hold could be filled with sacks of black pepper, stacks of porcelain dishes, and giant ceramic jars filled with aromatic resins, commodities that were heavier and more voluminous but still in immense demand. This difference in cargo shaped the very nature of the exchange. The land Silk Road was a relay race with goods passing through many hands from merchant to merchant across continents. Each transfer increased the final price, but a ship could sail directly from a port in China to one in the Persian Gulf, creating a more direct and often more profitable link between producer and consumer. The key players were different too. On land, trade was often managed by nomadic confederations or controlled by powerful intermediate empires like Parthia. At sea, the dominant forces were maritime city-states and kingdoms whose power was projected by their fleets, like the Srivijaya Empire in Southeast Asia or the Tamil Chola dynasty in India, whose magnificent bronze sculptures were themselves a product of this oceanic exchange. Perhaps the most profound difference was the movement of people. A camel caravan might include a few dozen merchants and guards. A ship, however, could carry an entire community. This is how lasting diaspora cultures were born. Arab and Persian traders did not just visit the ports of East Africa and the Malabar coast of India. They settled there, marrying local women, building mosques, and establishing families that would become integral to the region for centuries. These communities became the vital nodes in the network, fluent in both the local language and the customs of international trade, ensuring that business could continue smoothly season after season. Yet to see these two systems as rivals is to miss the bigger picture. They were deeply intertwined, two halves of a single global circulatory system. A bolt of silk from China might travel part of the way by ship to a Persian port, then be loaded onto camels for the final journey to the Mediterranean. Conversely, Roman glassware could arrive by sea in an Indian port, only to be carried north by land into Central Asia. The most telling evidence for this interconnected world is often not found in royal tombs, but in the garbage heaps of ancient towns. A shard of Chinese porcelain unearthed in a Swahili village, or a Roman coin discovered in a field in southern India. These small, silent objects are the true testaments to a world that was connected not by one road but by many. A shipwreck is a story frozen in a single, catastrophic moment. The Belitung wreck, an Arab how resting on the floor of the Java Sea for over 1,000 years, is one such story. When divers discovered its wooden hull, they found a cargo that rewrote history, a massive collection of exquisite Chinese porcelain from the Tang dynasty. This was not a theory or a legend, it was physical proof of a direct, long-distance voyage. An Arab trading ship had sailed all the way to China, loaded its hold with tens of thousands of bowls, vases, and cups, and was on its return journey when it met its end. The ceramics themselves are a snapshot of globalized taste, decorated with motifs that blended Chinese artistic traditions with styles favored by Middle Eastern consumers. This single wreck confirms what texts only hinted at, that by the 9th century, the maritime Silk Road was a well-established highway, with specialized production and complex trade agreements spanning half the world. These underwater time capsules are not alone. Across the globe, scattered Roman coins found in soil layers in southern India tell a silent tale of commerce. They are not evidence of a Roman invasion, but of a thriving trade imbalance. Roman merchants, desperate for the black pepper and spices of India, paid for them in silver denarii, coins that were then often melted down for their bullion value by local rulers. A handful, lost or tucked away as curiosities, survived to tell the story. Similarly, a shard of distinctive green-glazed Chinese celadon pottery, unearthed at a Swahili coastal village in East Africa, is a breadcrumb left by a voyage that connected the South China Sea to the shores of the Indian Ocean. Each of these artifacts is a pin on a map, marking a point of contact that was once thought impossible. Underwater archaeology is the key that unlocks these submerged archives. By carefully excavating a wreck, scientists can learn more than just what was traded. The construction of the ship itself, the way its planks were fastened, the type of wood used, reveals the technological sophistication of the builders and the specific maritime traditions they belonged to. The personal belongings of the crew, a cooking pot, a gaming piece, or a navigational tool, offer an intimate glimpse into the lives of the people who crewed these floating bridges between cultures. They reveal the sheer range of goods that moved, from monumental stone blocks and stacks of raw metal to everyday items like glass beads and lamps. These physical objects move theories from the realm of speculation into established historical fact. They give us precise dates through scientific techniques like carbon dating. They show us the exact routes by analyzing the origin of the cargo, and they document the specific commodities that fueled the global economy of their time. A theory about contact between ancient Egypt and the Americas remains a theory without a single Egyptian artifact conclusively found in a pre-Columbian archaeological layer. But the Tang Dynasty porcelain on the Belitung wreck is irrefutable. It is the hard evidence that turns a what-if into a when and how. Yet for every shipwreck found, 1,000 likely remain hidden in the deep, their wooden hulls long since consumed by sea worms. For every coin discovered, countless more have corroded into dust. The evidence we have is only a fraction of the story, a few recovered pages from a vast library that lies at the bottom of the sea. This incompleteness is what fuels the great mysteries, the tantalizing hints of voyages for which we may never find the final, conclusive proof. What other connections, what other exchanges have been completely lost to time? The search for these answers continues, not just with shovels and sonar, but with a much quieter tool, one that can trace connections even when all physical evidence has vanished, the silent map written in our very genes. A single Egyptian ship returning from a successful circumnavigation of Africa would have rotted away to nothing millennia ago. The evidence for many of history's most ambitious voyages is just as fragile, written on materials that the sea consumes without a trace. We know from the Greek historian Herodotus that the pharaoh Necho II allegedly commissioned a Phoenician crew to sail south from the Red Sea to see if they could return to the Mediterranean by sailing around Libya, the ancient name for Africa. Herodotus reports that the voyage took 3 years and that the sailors claimed to have seen the sun on their right-hand side as they sailed west, a detail that actually confirms they had crossed the equator into the southern hemisphere. Yet without a single piece of archaeological proof, this incredible journey remains in the realm of legend. Similarly, a massive Chinese treasure fleet under the command of the Muslim Admiral Zheng. He sailed the Indian Ocean in the 15th century, decades before the European age of exploration. His largest ships were Titans, dwarfing the vessels that Columbus would later use. Court records describe voyages that reached the coast of East Africa, and some scholars have proposed, based on controversial interpretations of old maps, that part of his fleet may have continued across the Atlantic. But if such a crossing occurred, no physical trace of a Chinese settlement in the Americas has ever been found. The sea keeps its secrets well. A wooden ship decays, a cotton sail dissolves, a papyrus logbook turns to pulp. This is why the absence of evidence cannot be taken as proof that something never happened. The historical record is not a complete library, but a collection of fragments that survived by chance, preserved in exceptionally dry tombs or protected by the unique conditions of a deep water shipwreck. Every new discovery has the power to Chinese letter, the timeline we thought was settled. The remains of a Roman trading post in India or a Norse settlement in Newfoundland were once considered impossible until a trowel in the dirt proved otherwise. This is what makes the study of ancient sea travel so electrifying. It is a field where a single storm, uncovering a wreck on a forgotten seabed, can rewrite a chapter of human history. The great puzzles, like the journey of the sweet potato or the origin of the Olmec heads, are not failures of scholarship. They are invitations. They remind us that the map of the past is still being drawn, and that the courage of those early mariners is mirrored by the curiosity of those who seek to understand them. The same ships that carried silk and spices also carried invisible, lethal passengers. A flea hiding in the fur of a black rat stowed away in the cargo hold of a merchant ship could carry a bacterium that would reshape continents. The most devastating example was the Black Death, which swept out of Central Asia in the 14th century. It did not march by land alone, it raced along the sea lanes. A single infected ship docking at a bustling port like Caffa in the Crimea or Messina in Sicily could introduce the plague to an entire region, with death spreading outward from the waterfront with terrifying speed. The very networks that created cosmopolitan wealth now delivered a pandemic, reducing populations by a third or more in some areas, and irrevocably altering the social and economic fabric of Europe and Asia. This was the dark side of connection, a stark reminder that the ocean was a bridge for catastrophe as well as commerce. Yet these journeys also wove a more hopeful, enduring thread into the human story, one written in the language of our DNA. When the great Austronesian canoes landed on the shores of Madagascar, they did not arrive on an empty island. They encountered people who had already migrated from the East African mainland. The two populations met, mixed, and intermarried. Today, genetic studies of the Malagasy people reveal a stunning dual heritage, with roughly equal contributions from Southeast Asian and East African ancestors. This is not a vague cultural influence, it is a biological fact etched into every cell, a living record of that ancient encounter across the Indian Ocean. Similarly, the Viking voyagers left a distinct genetic signature wherever they raided, traded, and settled. The DNA of modern populations in the British Isles, Iceland, and even as far south as Sicily contains clear markers tracing back to Norse ancestors. These are not just stories in a saga, they are family histories encoded in our very bodies. This biological exchange represents the most intimate possible level of contact. It moves beyond the trade of an object or the adoption of an idea, becoming a literal merging of families and futures. A Polynesian navigator and his family settling in a new island chain did not just bring their language and their taro plants, they contributed their unique genetic lineage to all the generations that followed. The global map we see today, with its complex tapestry of human variation, is in large part a product of these ancient sea voyages. The courage to sail into the blue horizon did not just redistribute cultures, it reshaped humanity itself, blending populations in ways that continue to define our physical diversity. This interconnected biological history challenges the very idea of pure or isolated peoples, revealing that we are all, in a profound sense, the children of sailors. The word discovery itself holds a hidden bias, implying an empty land waiting to be found by an outside eye. We are taught a story of global connection that begins in 1492, a narrative centered squarely on European ambition. But the oceans tell a different, much older story, one where the starring roles are played by Polynesian navigators, Arab merchants, and Norse explorers. Long before European caravels set sail, the world was already a vibrant network of exchange. To claim that Columbus discovered America is to ignore the thriving civilizations that had been there for millennia, and to dismiss the voyages of Leif Erikson 5 centuries earlier. This is not about diminishing one group's achievements, but about expanding the stage to include all of humanity. The Polynesian settlement of the Pacific was one of the greatest feats of exploration in history, a conscious, deliberate expansion across thousands of miles of open ocean. Arab and Indian traders did not just know the Indian Ocean, they had mapped its winds and currents with a precision that allowed for scheduled, reliable trade for over 1,000 years. These were not accidental discoveries, they were the results of sophisticated knowledge systems passed down through generations. Shifting our perspective forces a crucial question. Why have we privileged one thread of this global tapestry over all the others? The answer often lies in who wrote the history books. European empires documented their voyages in extensive detail, their accounts forming the foundation of our modern historical canon. The oral traditions of Polynesian wayfinders or the rudders of Arab sea captains did not always survive the same way in Western libraries. Correcting this imbalance is not an act of revisionism, but of recovery. It is an acknowledgement that curiosity and courage are universal human traits, not the exclusive property of any single culture. This richer, more complex story does not simply add a few extra names to the list of explorers. It fundamentally changes our understanding of how the modern world was built. The globalized era did not begin with European expansion, it was merely accelerated by it. The true roots lie in those ancient sea lanes, in the multilingual ports of the Indian Ocean, and in the brave decision to sail toward an empty horizon. Recognizing this shared heritage allows us to see our interconnected present not as a sudden invention, but as the latest chapter in a very long and truly global conversation. The cedar forests that built the Phoenician fleets did not grow back overnight. The very success of their maritime network created a demand that stripped their own landscapes, a stark reminder that ancient globalization carried an ecological price tag. This tension between connection and sustainability is a lesson etched into the soil of remote islands. On Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island, the Polynesian settlers found a fragile ecosystem. Their society flourished, constructing the famous moai statues, but the evidence suggests that the intensive use of resources, including the clearing of the island's unique palm forests for tools and to move the massive stone figures, may have contributed to a severe ecological downturn. Their isolation meant there was no neighboring island to provide relief when resources grew scarce. They were living in a globalized network of their own making, but one that had very real, localized limits. These were not people who failed to understand their environment. They were people navigating the complex challenges of a connected world, much like we do today. The ancient maritime networks created a profound economic interdependence. A drought in the spice islands of Southeast Asia could send shockwaves through the markets of Rome, just as a political conflict in the Mediterranean could leave Indian ports idle, their warehouses full of unsold pepper. This system was resilient with multiple routes and players, but it was also vulnerable to disruption. The spread of technology, from the lateen sail to the magnetic compass, was a powerful benefit of this interconnection, but it also meant that advances in shipbuilding could be used for war as easily as for trade. The same sea lanes that carried Buddhist monks peacefully to new shores also carried the armies of maritime empires. This duality is the central lesson. Our modern globalization, with its instant communication and container ships, is not a complete break from the past. It is an acceleration of a very old human story. We face the same fundamental choices between cultural exchange that enriches and assimilation that erases, between economic growth that lifts all boats and exploitation that depletes both people and the planet. The ancient mariners show us that connection is a powerful force, but it is not inherently good or bad. Its value depends on the wisdom with which we manage it. Their legacy is not locked in a museum. It is in the sweet potato on your plate, the alphabet on your screen, and the very mix of cultures that defines our cities. They teach us that the drive to reach across the water is a fundamental part of being human, and that our greatest challenge is to navigate the connections we create with both courage and care. That legacy is not confined to the distant past. It lives in the very rhythm of our modern lives, especially in the flavors we take for granted. Open your kitchen cabinet and you will find a time capsule from the age of sail. The black pepper you grind over a meal was once so valuable it was used as currency, a treasure hauled across the Indian Ocean on Arab dhows. The cinnamon in your oatmeal and the nutmeg in your pumpkin pie were once the exclusive preserve of distant spice islands, their locations guarded secrets that launched 1,000 ships. These common seasonings are the direct descendants of ancient cargoes, their journey from exotic luxury to everyday staple made possible by those maritime networks. Our language, too, carries the echo of the sea. The word admiral comes from the Arabic Amir al-Bahr, which translates to commander of the sea. Monsoon derives from the Arabic mawsim, meaning season, a testament to the predictable winds that powered trade. Even tycoon, a word we associate with industrial magnates, has roots in the Japanese taikon, meaning great lord, a title that entered Western vocabularies through maritime contact. This linguistic borrowing is a subtle but constant reminder of how deeply these exchanges are woven into our communication. The fusion goes deeper than words and spices. It resonates in the music we hear. The lute, a central instrument in European Renaissance music, evolved from the Arabic al-ud, which itself had traveled along trade routes. The stories we tell, from seafaring epics to flood myths, are variations on themes that have crossed oceans for millennia, adapted and retold in each new port. Perhaps the most immediate experience of this ancient connection is on our plates. Consider a simple bowl of curry. Its complex spice blend has roots in the Indian subcontinent, but the chili pepper that gives it heat is native to the Americas, introduced to Asia by Portuguese traders sailing the very routes their Arab and Indian predecessors had mapped. This single dish is a culinary map of the world, a delicious testament to the fact that our cultural identities are not pure or isolated. They are beautifully hybrid, forged in the meeting places of the ancient world, on the docks and in the markets where different civilizations looked past their differences and shared a meal. To understand this is to see our globalized present not as a sudden phenomenon, but as the latest expression of a very old, very human story of connection. Our journey across these ancient seas leaves us with a world redrawn. The lines on the map are not boundaries of isolation, but the vibrant tracks of countless voyages. The Phoenician alphabet that evolved into our own, the Polynesian sweet potato that silently witnessed a transoceanic journey, the Buddhist temples of Java that speak of ideas carried on the monsoon winds, these are not scattered curiosities. They are the enduring legacy of a planet that was always connected. These maritime pioneers challenge the very core of a history taught in separate chapters, revealing a past woven together by courage and curiosity. They force us to replace the idea of discovery with a far richer understanding of encounter and exchange. The oceans were never empty voids. They were the world's first and greatest highways, carrying not just ships and spices, but the very foundations of our modern world. In our own era of instant global connection, their stories offer profound lessons. They speak to the resilience found in cultural adaptation, the wealth generated by cooperative trade, and the vital importance of respecting the different worlds we encounter. The choices they faced between sustainable use and reckless depletion, between mutual benefit and domination, are the same choices that define our globalized present. Their legacy is a reminder that connection is a powerful tide, and it is our wisdom that determines whether it builds or erodes. What connections in your own life trace back to these ancient routes? Share your thoughts on these incredible journeys in the comments, and subscribe for more explorations into the deep mysteries of our shared past.